Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward.
And I'm Melissa Ridgen. It was 10 years ago the federal government apologized to survivors of the residential school system. Today, that was acknowledged in the capital.
But as Todd Lamoran reports, a lot of talk was around what still needs to be done. And it started this morning in Gatineau, Quebec.
Senator Kim Pate hosted the unveiling of a 10-year anniversary exhibit at the Museum of History. But she also spoke of her familiarity with one of the legacies of residential schools.
And see the horrid, tragic travesty of the results of not dealing with the marginalization, the victimization, and then we see the resulting criminalization and imprisonment of massive numbers of Indigenous peoples.
The morning speeches were interrupted by two survivors. Peter Sakanay and his sister Vivian Timmons took issue with the lack of planning and lack of survivors at the event.
Always, when it comes to honoring those residential poor people, just don't talk about them. Put them up here. Let the people see that we are real and we're not figments of some people in Canadian society's imagination that does not really happen. It took place, it's real.
Why was this done last minute? Why wasn't it planned? Why weren't we aware of any of this? Where are all the survivors? You know, that's being excluded again. And we've been challenged in courts about this IEP. We've been challenged with the child welfare still taking their kids. It's got to stop somewhere.
The apology acknowledgement shifted over to the House of Commons, where Evelyn Korkmaz spoke. She's a survivor of the notorious St. Anne's Residential School.
I am here today because I don't want my grandchildren, Zoe and Evan, to have the same experience I had in residential school. This history should never be repeated again.
A new Angus Reid poll says support for apologizing to residential school survivors is slumping. 53% of Canadians say too much time is spent apologizing and it's time to move on. 53% also say Indigenous people should not get special status and should be just like other Canadians. Crown Indigenous Relations Minister Carolyn Bennett says events like today and the apology are needed by survivors, and that people's minds will change.
Is that curricula will change, the mandatory courses in universities, the media, that we still are on a journey where the 95% don't really know what they don't know. And so, you know, we will just put one foot in front of the other and continue to educate.
Whether it carries the shame of Canada, we must rewrite Canada's history.
Also part of the 10-year anniversary was translating the 2008 apology into Plains Cree, Inuktitut, Mi'kmaq, and 4 additional Indigenous languages. Todd Lamoran, APTN National News, Ottawa.
More on that new poll that Todd Lamoran referenced there. It was released today, and it reveals that Canadians are deeply divided on Indigenous issues. According to the Angus Reid Institute, respondents were inclined to believe Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is paying too much attention to Indigenous matters rather than too little. We have Angus Reid of the Angus Reid Institute here to discuss the poll. Hi, Mr. Reid. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Melissa.
Hi. So, why did you do this poll? And what struck you most about the results?
Well, we did the poll because clearly the issue of Indigenous Canadians and policy issues around that matter have been receiving a tremendous amount of attention, especially since the election of Trudeau, and even before that. So we felt as a not-for-profit institute that it would be worthwhile to do a really in-depth piece. I've seen some polls that have been, somewhat skimming the surface, and we wanted to do something with a very large sample size, which allowed us to really look at how people see Indigenous issues and how they relate to Indigenous people within their own province. It struck us that it's pretty bizarre just to talk about Indigenous people in general. I mean, someone in Saskatchewan may know what's going on in Saskatchewan, but really may have no feel about, New Brunswick or BC or other provinces. So we wanted to use a kind of ground-up approach to really try and look at some of the issues here. And we did a very large sample size, about 2,500. We spent 6 months planning this survey. including getting some good input from members of the Indigenous community. So the results, boy, there's a lot in there, but I guess if I had to summarize...
I want you to start with the mindset of there's 4 mindsets on Indigenous Canadians, and then that kind of branches into a lot of the other findings in this poll. I'd like you to tell me about those, the 4 mindsets. Well,
the 4 mindsets really deal with how people in general feel on some of what we call the existential issues concerning Indigenous peoples in Canada. And there was a group, and they split almost 25% each of these. There's a group which we refer to as hardliners, which in fact are, not anti-Indigenous Canadians, but are on issues confronting, the Indigenous communities, such as the level of independence for reserves, the level of integration into Canadian society versus maintenance of traditional culture, et cetera. These hardliners tend to adopt what I think call more of a traditional small c conservative attitude on the question. There's a number of other groups, one of which we call wary, which are a little bit like the hardliners. They are wary on these questions, but are frankly, not as strong and strident. On the other side of the equation, about 25% of Canadians are advocates. They hold very small L liberal views on almost all of the existential issues we looked at in the survey. They favor the maintenance of high levels of independence for Indigenous communities. On just about every issue, they tend to, I think, align themselves very much with the position of Prime Minister Trudeau and some members of his cabinet. And finally, there's a 4th group, which we refer to as sympathetic, which are, over in the direction of the advocates, but still have some questions. So those are the 4 groups. And I think at the end of the day, what we find is that there's a lot of conflict among Canadians themselves on many of these issues. There's not, maybe to put it slightly differently, there's not a high level of consensus on these, what I call broad existential issues on, how do we deal with and relate to Indigenous communities in Canada.
Well, even on the issue of something that struck me was money, the finances of this. 33% of those polled feel that there's too much money being invested into Indigenous matters, but 75% feel that First Nations can succeed if given the proper level of investment. So there's...
This is a look at, and I think one of the things that really became clear, this is a complex issue. And if you're looking for a nice, linear, easy solution from the standpoint of Canadians, you're not going to find it. There's a couple of areas in which there is widespread agreement. Number one, there is a almost a universal view that the conditions facing Indigenous communities, both on reserve and off reserve, is not great, that there's a lot of problems confronting Canada's Indigenous people. And we asked that, by the way, from the standpoint of, looking at your own province out. So I think that's a fairly good measure. Secondly, there's a belief that the federal government is wasting a lot of the money that's currently being spent. So there's an assessment. Yes, there's a big problem, but also a view held almost across all of these groups that there's a lot of money being wasted. I think if there's one point of optimism, it is the belief that these are issues that can be resolved. And as you just pointed out, I mean, by a pretty overwhelming majority, Canadians think that there is a way of improving the position of Indigenous Canadians. I think the point that I made in a column that I recently wrote is we have to begin by looking at the concrete steps that need to be taken, for which there's a lot of consensus, as opposed to getting into political science 101 debates about, the extent to which there should be self-government versus non-self-government and some of those other sort of broad policy issues. Instead, we should be looking at, and there's consensus on this, investing in very practical solutions which can be of assistance to people in the Indigenous community. So I felt actually quite positive about that, notwithstanding some of the differences at a very general level.
It's fascinating. We're going to have a story on our website that kind of looks into more of this poll. Thank you so much for joining us.
Melissa, thank you.
Thanks. You can see the poll in its entirety on our website, aptnnews.ca. And we would like to hear what you have to say about this or any other story. Here's how you can contact us. Send us an email to news@aptn.ca, like our APTN National News Facebook page, follow us on Twitter @APTN News, or go to our website, aptnnews.ca.
Close to 100 people gathered in front of Kinder Morgan's Westridge Dock in Burnaby, British Columbia, amid a heavy police presence. They said that they will continue to fight the Trans Mountain Pipeline, no matter who ends up owning it. APTN's Tina House has more on the story.
We believe that we will win! We believe that we will win!
It's been nearly 2 weeks since the federal government announced it was purchasing the Trans Mountain Pipeline and that the project was going ahead. But these water protectors are determined to continue to try and stop that pipeline. For Elder Tom Ullman, he says he wanted to come today to lend his voice in the fight against the pipeline.
We are risking a very, very natural way of life for an opportunity to make money in the dying industry. We're going to be spending billions of dollars on an industry that's basically going to be gone in a short while. And the way that they're damaging those people in the tar sands area is irreplaceable and irrecoverable.
Dwayne Gaston Aucoin from the Tuslet Tlingit First Nation in the Yukon says that if there is a spill, it will affect everyone.
The Chinook fishery has collapsed up in the Yukon. So the last thing we need are tankers and oil all along the coast, because it'll impact us up in the Yukon as well. It'll impact everybody along the coast. And our salmon are having such a hard enough time as it is, that why make it even harder for them?
And a heavy police presence rolled in, quickly moving as the water protectors began to stop traffic from entering the worksite, even setting up a command post to process those that were going to be arrested.
There's no more 10-minute waiting period. So once the injunction's read and you've heard it, you're welcome to have a copy of it, and you can follow along. And then there's a 5-step process, which is just so you're fully informed of the consequence, and then you're asked to leave the roadway. If you fail to leave at that time, you will be arrested.
After the injunction was read, everyone decided not to be arrested and left the roadway peacefully. Meanwhile, it was revealed that the oil spill in Kamloops on May the 27th that Kinder Morgan reported as being only 100 liters of crude oil was actually 4,600 liters. The company was given a warning to be more accurate in the spill reports from now on. Tina House, APTN National News, Burnaby.
Well, as you know, it's National Indigenous History Month, and APTN has launched a new interactive experience. I'll tell you all about it after the break.
And an On the Land University has hosted its graduation. But first, here's a look at weather for tomorrow. On the East Coast, we've got 26 and 21 and lots of sun in Fredericton and Halifax. Up in Labrador, Happy Valley, Goose Bay, 10. We've got 25 and cloudy in Val-d'Or, 24 in Toronto, Kapuskasing 24, Big Trout, late rain in 23, some sun and cloud in Churchill 14, Winnipeg's 22, Brandon's 21. In Saskatchewan now, we've got lots of sun and cloud, 13 in North Battleford, 20 down in Estevan. Uranium City, cloudy, 14, 17 in Stony Rapids, also cloudy. Further south, 11 in Meadow Lake.
Welcome back. The only Bush University in the Northwest Territories just held their latest graduation. And this year, the students were rewarded for their accomplishments at the Legislative Assembly. Our reporter Charlotte Mort Jacobs attended their special evening.
Family Drybones Folio and Savannah Lance are graduating from another semester at Deshinta Bush University.
Feeling both very excited and exhausted. It's definitely a beautiful thing to watch all of us up there and graduating.
Deshinta's cohort of students had returned to Yellowknife after 8 weeks of on-the-land learning focused on traditional Dene laws and practices.
Oh, it's so cute.
The last time APTN visited Lance and Drybones Folio, they were in the bush. Now they read excerpts of what they have learned.
We get together all at once. Each of us has an opportunity to talk, while the rest listen. We call this governance.
Other students, such as Leanna Rice and Anouk from Labrador, spoke towards how their relationship to caribou had changed.
Although caribou are scarce, my relationship to the activities and the practices that my people have done for thousands of years still remains.
For Lance, her experience at Deshinta was deeply personal. When we last saw her at camp, she was researching traditional beauty practices.
Just as we noticed today, I mean, I've been cutting meat up pretty much all morning, and my hands have never been so soft.
Her focus has greatly shifted since then.
When I started thinking about traditional beauty practices, I really started thinking about the way people represent themselves.
But when she learned about traditional roles that were gendered in Indigenous society, she asked why queer Dene culture was not included in teachings.
I am taught as though I am expected to have a male partner to share my life with. That he will essentially know all of the male-centered teachings of the Indigenous way of life, and that I will know all of the women.
Lance will return to Deshinta in the fall as a student and as an advisor, working to make the school more inclusive for queer people. At Deshinta, students earn a minor in Indigenous Studies from universities such as University of Alberta, University of British Columbia, and McGill. They complete textbook and physical work on the land, something Drybones Folio says she will miss.
One thing that I'm not excited for is hearing like the constant buzz of electronics. I think that was something that I really loved about being on the land, is you wake up and you hear nature.
I'm able to learn with my son.
Mothers who brought their children over the semester also spoke about the importance of having their kids with them as they learn, and how much the children of the students learn from being at camp. The next semester of Deshinta runs this summer. Charlotte Moore-Jacobs, APTN National News, Yellowknife.
I like that story. Claiming our identities. It's the focus of a new website developed by APTN's marketing department to open up the conversation on Indigenous identity. Ashley Branson has more.
StayOriginal.ca is an interactive website created to honor National Indigenous History Month. It allows users to take a journey of self-reflection, recognizing what they value most and defining who they are for themselves.
We recognize that identity is something very personal. What the site won't do is it won't ask you to choose a label or to check off which box identifies you the best.
Instead, the site takes you through questions where you decide what matters most to you in your life. Then users are given a customized graphic that represents their own unique combination of traits. Participants are able to compare graphics with other people's to discover how they're connected.
It gives you space to enter in your own personal, meaningful statement of what matters most to you, and then share that. And that's the conversation that we want to have, and that's the thing that we want to celebrate about Indigenous identity, is that everybody has their own personal take on it, and only you can really say who you are.
The website's been online for over a week, and nearly 400 people have participated so far.
Just such a beautiful thing to see. And then as more and more collect and gather, and to be able to see what that represents like as a whole, is just a really awesome thing.
You can take part on StayOriginal.ca during all of National Indigenous History Month. Ashley Branson, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Well, time for another quick break, but stick around. There's much more to come.
But first, here's a look at a story we'll have for you in the coming days.
I'm Kent Driscoll in Iqaluit. This is what Iqaluit's annual sea lift looks like. Barges come in at high tide and are unloaded at low. Not after this year. A new port is set to change the sea lift, which may change the city itself. That's coming soon on APTN National News.
11 in high level and some rain. Fort Chip is 11 and raining as well.
Down in southern Alberta, lots of sunshine. Calgary 20, Lethbridge 21. Out on the west coast, we've got Kamloops and Penticton sunny, 23, 25. Dease Lake is 17, Fort Nelson 19. Up in the Yukon, Beaver Creek 11, Dawson City 15. The Northwest Territories, lots of cloud and rain. Yellowknife, I don't know. Inuvik is 9, Colville Lake is 11. Cambridge Bay is 1, Baker Lake sunny and 8. We've got Goya Haven 3, Igloolik 5, and Iqaluit 3.
Before we leave you tonight, we have a story from our colleagues at the National Indigenous Television in Australia. Much like up here, the original people are losing their languages, and they're losing them fast. Turns out there's an app for that.
The United Nations has said publicly that Australia is losing Indigenous languages faster than anywhere else in the world. Between 2005 and 2014, 25 languages disappeared. Out of the 120 surviving, only 14 are spoken by young children through to adults. But the Australian Literacy and Numeracy Foundation is hoping to change that.
How do we get our kids and our parents and carers involved in education even before the school system starts, before kindergarten or transition? And so we work on that basis, and to be able to learn from a first language perspective is so important because it helps you learn English later.
The ALNF has developed a digital app for Indigenous children whose first language isn't English. It was developed with the remote community of Groote Island in the Northern Territory. Tom says the app was developed with support from Google Challenge.
What's really important is that it's owned by the community. It's about developing the capacity of the community to be able to record their own languages and stories and any sort of phrases that they want to use, greetings, want to describe something. So it all belongs to the community.
The ALNF language app and literacy program are being supported by CDP body My Pathway.
With over 900 staff and a far-reaching footprint into remote and rural communities in particular, we're very well placed to provide support to communities who want to look at language maintenance and preservation. And today's event was really to get information out to communities to help stimulate them to come up with their own plans, and for us to support those community-owned and community-built plans around language preservation.
And if you're wondering, it's going to be 14 above in Yellowknife tomorrow.
Thank you, because I don't know.
That is your APTN National News for this Monday. You can always find more at our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Dennis Ward. Have a great night.
And I'm Melissa Ridgen. Have a great night. We'll see you tomorrow.